May 29th, 2024. I want to discuss something on this video that kind of a bit more of a broader topic because I've been hitting the issues related to the Ukraine war and other situations. But I want to get a little bit more geostrategic here and address I think the big problem. And let's go back, for instance, to the beginning of Trump's first term. I think one of the most notable things that happened as soon as he was in office was that the uh, sting operation was pulled on General Flynn, his national security advisor, um, which was an attempt by the deep state to basically take him out of the Trump administration and therefore to influence foreign policy and therefore to get people that were more favorable to the establishment's viewpoint of things to influence President Trump. And in fact, by a series of measures, this was successful. The two things: one, putting people that had the other point of view around him, and two, essentially a continuous series of Democrat attacks claiming that somehow he was a tool of Putin or something, simply because he wanted to maintain favorable relationships with the Russian Federation. And of course, I think ultimately this manipulation was largely successful. Ironically enough, of course, this led to the first impeachment when he was actually withholding certain aid packages in an attempt to get some facts about what the Biden's operations, which were probably corrupt, in Ukraine were, particularly Hunter Biden, and presumably was an emissary for Joe Biden, the current president. So, and I think that's one thing to look at. The other thing is, what has been the consequence of our war on Ukraine, or war in Ukraine? Other than a lot of dead Ukrainians and a significant number of dead Russians and a lot of destroyed equipment and money expended, a lot of buildings destroyed, families displaced. Well, up to now it's been virtual stalemate, although in recent months it looks like the Russians are making moderate advances. And it does seem like that maybe the overall strength of the Ukrainian military is being weakened. But the biggest geostrategic thing that's been done here is we've kind of concocted a new axis of evil. We've actually, if you want to call them evil, but at least a new counter alliance. That is to say, whereas General Flynn's proposal was to improve relations with Russia, basically to separate them from China, to keep them somewhat distant from China, to simply do the kind of the reverse of the policies that the Nixon administration did in the 1970s and I guess was carried on from the Ford administration afterwards, to try to basically to improve relationships with China, to put pressure on the Soviet Union. Now that the real long-term strategic threat is seen to be China, the idea would have been to have improved relationships and ties with Russia to put some pressure on China, essentially, or at least to keep them from forming too close of an alliance. However, what Biden has managed to accomplish is to do quite the opposite. And the recent state visit of President Putin to Beijing to meet with President Xi has further solidified this relationship. And that is not what would be a good U.S. foreign policy. And by the way, if you like these videos, please give me a like. We need all we can for the algorithms. If you haven't subscribed, we're looking for more subscriptions. And I point out I also post under the same name as indicated in the description below. That you can find me on Rumble if you're a member of Rumble instead. So this is the basic problem I have with the Ukraine war more than any other single thing. There are other considerations, but it is not the optimum U.S. foreign policy. In fact, it seems to be driven by sort of a reactionary set of circumstances, and a lot of it, I would say, is kind of mission creep of organizations. As we notice that, almost all organizations that have a purpose initially keep on operating even after their purpose is accomplished. I mean, there's probably no level of blood alcohol level that the Mothers Against Drunk Driving would countenance and would probably, to the degree they can, would continue to push the lower levels. Or at various environmental groups want to reduce to even more lower levels any kind of pollutant that's there, even though you're down to kind of very trivial levels. We have very clean air and so forth. Yet they continue to push in that direction and so forth. So my point is, NATO and our own security establishment, particularly with the end of the counter-terrorist wars, pretty much, apparently looking forward to the next engagement, have been pushing in a certain direction. For instance, NATO is continually trying to bring more countries under its umbrella for some reason, even countries that would be harder for them to really defend if there really was an aggressor, and ones that might end up destabilizing things. But that doesn't seem to stop that momentum. And then you also have the situation, where it's ever since roughly 2008, when NATO started talking about bringing the nations of Ukraine and Georgia into their umbrella, this has been strongly opposed by the Russian Federation. And in fact, the West has been warned repeatedly, well before the February 2022 invasion of Ukraine, not to do what they're doing. And yet they continue to persist in this effort, including, I think, having a lot to do with the coup that overthrew the elected government in 2014. Now, one could argue a lot of things about that. Was that a fair election? Was there cheating in that election? And people even argue, was there cheating in our election in 2020? But the point I'm making is, has been cheating in elections since then? And currently, the current Zelensky's term of office is now had expired on May the 20th, and yet he still remains president. So with no election. So while we keep touting the democracy called Ukraine, we find out that in reality it's kind of becoming a little bit less democratic than it had been. So these policies remain dangerous, and of course, Iran is also and North Korea have also been brought into this whole structure. I mean, one of the most serious situations has been that it looks as if, in order to get ammunition supplies from North Korea, Russia has been basically supporting in some form the development of ICBMs by North Korea, which actually increases the actual potential risk to the continental United States and to our allies. And in my opinion, North Korea getting more power is probably a much more serious threat than whatever would happen if some of the breakaway oblasts in Ukraine were actually to be incorporated into the Russian Federation. I mean, so, and I see no real evidence that Russia wants to actually annex all of Ukraine at all. I think that it's pretty clear cut that was never the real objective, unless I think it was never the real objective at all. I think if by chance their early invasion had been successful beyond their wildest dreams, and they could have installed a Russian favorable puppet regime, they probably would have done that. However, that was probably aspirational rather than realistic. Who knows what their internal thinking was on the ability of Ukraine to resist, but nevertheless, it didn't happen, and Russia pretty eagerly agreed to withdraw from the area around Kyiv and focus on the eastern breakaway areas. So my thinking is, and of course it was only at that point that they got double crossed, I guess, again, and Ukraine decided on promises from the United States and Britain to continue the war with the objective of completely expelling Russia from all historic, from the areas that the Ukrainian Socialist Republic had during the Soviet Union, which are, I guess, considered the internationally recognized territories. Although it is interesting that while the territory of Yugoslavia, for instance, was not considered sacrosanct by the West, as it had been set up historically, all of a sudden the territory of Ukraine is, and there can be no compromise there, where there was plenty of compromise in what happened in Yugoslavia. they began to see the, completely, in other words, what they say is not true. And it's, and the question is, this is leading us potentially to war. That's the point. And I think it's a war we should not want. I'm hearing now that there's increasing talks, of bringing NATO troops into Ukraine. It's unclear exactly what for. I've also heard of ideas that, well, they could try to set up an air defense system on the Polish border, a few hundred meters inside of the Polish territory to shoot at Russian missiles, presumably, or whatever, that would come in range of these air defenses from outside of the Ukrainian territories. Presumably, these would now become a sacrosanct area that you couldn't attack, right? Because it somehow would invoke Article 5 if they did. Whereas on the other hand, we're having people such as the British foreign minister saying, well, Ukraine should go ahead and use Western weapons to attack targets inside of Russia. And remember, Ukraine has been doing a lot of attacking inside of Russia anyhow with their own domestically made drones, which suppose they've been doing significant damages to their oil refining capacity. So that is Russia. So, and meanwhile, now Russia's retaliating, but trying to destroy the electric generation systems inside of Ukraine, for among other things. So I think this is, this is just a senseless progress toward conflict for no good reason, largely because of a sort of a bureaucratic dynamic that developed. And there seems to be nobody is stopping to think, well, where are we really going with this? What do we think we're really going to accomplish with this? And is it a wise idea? And I'm arguing it isn't. As it is right now, this is creating a situation where China is now being accused of providing significant aid to the Russian effort. So far, not in terms of direct weapon supplies, but simply the dual-use capabilities of things that they could use to make them. Everything from machine tooling to computer chips or whatever. I did see a video very recently where one commentator, I don't know what he knows for sure, is thinking it could escalate now to where actual weapon systems could be provided. Now, I don't know about artillery, but I know that definitely the small arms ammunition, currently, China uses a different caliber than what Russia uses. But I think what could be very valuable to them, they were talking about drones of various types that China has developed. And also, I would think some of their tactical missiles, which have a longer range than the missiles that Russia currently has because of their commitment to the INF Treaty. And remember, the United States withdrew from the INF Treaty precisely so we could develop tactical missiles to counter the Chinese missiles that are long range, basically over the potential Taiwan conflict. So anyway, just to give you an idea, this is where this thing could be heading to. NATO troops in there, presumably initially just to train Ukrainians because they're worried that Ukrainians taken to NATO countries might desert and try to seek asylum. It looks like that inside of Ukraine, there's a significant amount of resistance to the latest mobilization law, and it's got down to the point where Ukraine is using basically press gangs to simply arrest people, send them into minimal training, and then throw them right in the front line. Sort of like what Russia was doing in the World War II, like in the movie Enemy at the Gates and stuff like that. So this is the sort of thing that's going on, and it's not a nice thing, but it is. So at any rate, that's kind of my general viewpoint. We're headed down the wrong path. It's a path that could lead to disaster. It's very unlikely to lead to success. And I think we should really seriously rethink it and avoid name calling about people that raise criticism. So I'll wrap this up for now. I'll be posting this not only here on YouTube, but also on Rumble. And the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below.